Hey man, aren't those videos cool? Man, they really set the stage well, you know? I don't know if you guys know, Natalie makes those, my sister, and so let's give it up for her. She does a good job at that. Well, if you've been with us for any amount of time, you know we've been going through a series through Genesis, and we took a little hiatus, but now we're back, and we're going to finish Genesis, believe it or not. We're in a new series, or mini-series, called Excellence, where we're going to follow the life of Joseph and his brothers until Christmas. The Joseph story takes up an amazing 13 chapters. By comparison, the creation of the universe took 2 chapters. So if that gives you a little sense of what's going on in the Joseph story. But I found it a little bit odd that as I was studying this and reading commentaries, most commentaries and studies spend so much time on the first 2 chapters of Genesis. Well, by the time you get to the end, it's kind of sparse. I just wonder if some of the commentators ran out of steam or something. But I think the best is for last. We've saved the best for last. This Genesis story, it's so dense with so many different themes of favoritism and family dysfunction, betrayal, violence, injustice, lies, deception, temptation, hard work, success, faithfulness, God's presence, God's hiddenness, boundaries, forgiveness, restoration, things central to what it means to be human in a broken world. The Apostle Paul, a leader in the early church, says this about the Old Testament in Romans 15:4. For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures and the encouragement that they provide, we might have hope. He also says to young Pastor Timothy in 2 Timothy 3:16, all Scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. Now, Scriptures here, as Paul refers to them, doesn't mean the New Testament, right? Why? Because it's still being written, right? He's writing the New Testament. So he's referring to the Old Testament, the Bible that Jesus read. And so it just shows us the importance of the Old Testament. Sometimes we think that the Old Testament is secondary, but it's super, super important. These stories and poems teach us some profound things about what it means to be human in a broken world and about the God who made us. Today I want us to look at 3 hidden things: the hidden depths of sin, the hidden purposes of God, and the hidden pattern of grace. So first, the hidden depths of sin. So let's dive right into the Joseph story, Genesis 37:2. If you got your Bibles, you can turn there, but it'll be on the screen as well. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. How many of you guys remember the eruption of Mount St. Helens? A number of you. I wasn't alive, so hopefully you feel old. But before the mountain blew, it looked beautiful. It looked amazing. Look at this, 1978. Just a beautiful looking mountain. But most smart geologists knew something was not good under the surface. Things were stirring and bubbling and ready to blow. And so I think we have a couple after pictures. So there's one of the eruptions itself and kind of a before-after picture. And I think the Mount St. Helens metaphor is a really good metaphor for the situation of Jacob's family. Things are stirring underneath. Things might look okay on the surface, but stuff's going down. A little recap on the magma that's stirring underneath this family. Jacob is the father. Jacob, Israel, same names. And he has 4 wives. Not a great idea. It doesn't turn out well. It's kind of like that show Sister Wives, right? There's just lots of turmoil and tension. Jacob has 12 sons and many daughters with these women. And his favorite wife, Rachel, which multiple wives and then having favorite wives, not good. But his favorite wife, Rachel, has 2 sons, Joseph and then Benjamin. And she actually dies giving birth to Benjamin, sadly. Her older sister, Leah, who's also married to Jacob, I told you it was messy, she also dies. And we're not sure how or when, but by Genesis 37, she's not on the scene. And so Joseph is 17 years old, and we're introduced to him. And the first thing we see about him is he brings a bad report to his father about his brothers. So there's 4 fatal factors that highlight the depravity, the depths of sin that are going on in this family. The first is the bad report. And so Joseph turns into his brothers for something. We're not sure what. He's a tattletale, a blabbermouth, a snitch. Any of you guys ever have a younger sibling like that? Maybe you cut a few corners on the chore chart, didn't sweep underneath the counter, didn't shake out the rugs, and your sibling of superior moral standing feels the need to call you out in front of your parents, right? And you're like, oh, just wait till parents go to bed. But on a bigger scale, this is even more serious because Jacob's sons are adult children. So this is more like the family business. And little baby Joseph at 17 writes up his brothers. I mean, imagine working with your older brothers and then writing them up. So that's the first fatal factor. The second is far more significant. Verse 3. Now Israel, that's Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Because he had been born to him in his old age. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So we see family favoritism, the next fatal factor. Why is this? Well, Joseph is the son of Jacob's old age, which means that, as Jacob was old, he had Joseph and from his favorite wife. How many of you experience family favoritism? Well, Joseph, man, he gets all the best presents. He gets more birthday presents, more attaboys, more praise. Anytime things are divided up, he always gets the biggest portion, biggest piece of cake, the most ice cream. Anytime there's a fight, dad comes into the room, it's never Joseph's fault. It's always someone else's fault. He always gets to ride shotgun on the camel. I don't know. you know? On special trips, the dad always takes Joey. So, and it gets even more serious. The hidden sin of favoritism isn't so hidden because this favoritism bubbles over into number 3 fatal, the third fatal factor, which is this coat that Jacob makes Joseph. The royal robe in verse 3. And in this time period, clothing was extremely valuable. It would take about 120 hours to make one piece of clothing from scratch. That's 2 to 3 weeks of full-time work for one shirt. Likely this glorious garment took much longer than that even. And the Greek Old Testament translation called the Septuagint, it's where we get this idea of a multicolored robe. The Hebrew is a little more ambiguous and has more the idea of long sleeves. Why is that significant that Joseph's robe is long sleeves? What is he not doing? Working. You have long sleeves, that means you're in management, right? You're the boss. You're not doing manual labor like everyone else. So this little punk 17-year-old gets the promotion before all of his brothers. And it just pushes them over the edge. But there's one more thing, one more final fatal factor that just incenses the brothers, and that's Joseph's dramatic dreams. Joseph's dramatic dreams. Dreams are far more significant back then and in other cultures than our own culture. We just kind of brush off dreams. They're not real significant to us. But even today in Arab and African culture, dreams make a bigger deal. Let's turn to Genesis 37:5 to kind of read a little bit about these dreams. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he said. Then he had another dream and told it to his brothers. You'd think he'd get it, right? "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So Joseph has these 2 dreams, and in dream 1, It's pretty simple. The sheaves of wheat or grain or whatever they're gathering kind of circle Joseph's sheaf and bow down, and the implication's clear. It's like, you guys are going to serve me. And then in the second dream, the sun and the moon and 11 stars bow down to Joseph, which seems to represent, the sun seems to represent Jacob, the moon seems to represent the mother, and the 11 stars represent the brothers. There's a curious reference to the moon as Joseph's mother, who's no longer alive. So some have wondered about that. Some have thought maybe this is Bilhah, his stepmom and Rachel's servant. Others have probably said that this portrays Joseph's prominence over the family line, over the ancestral line, superseding even his parents and even his ancestors and brothers. Right, back then, older family members and ancestors had more prominence, but Joseph in his dream is almost saying like, he's going to be more prominent. So it gives you kind of this sense on how radical the second dream was. Many have speculated about Joseph's character. Some see Joseph as a near perfect character in the Bible, compared to Daniel or even Jesus, with no mention of sin or character flaw. Others see Joseph as just as bad as his brothers. I think it's likely it's somewhere in the middle, right? Joseph, he's mixed. The way he flaunts his dreams seems to be immature and insensitive at best, maybe prideful and vindictive at worst. Even his favoring father scolds him after having the dream, right, or sharing the dream. Anyway, family favoritism is building up, and so is brotherly resentment. 3 times back to back it says the brothers hate him. They hate him, they hate him. They can't speak a kind word to him. They're jealous of him. And Joseph stokes their fire by flaunting his dreams. His mountain's about to blow. So the other brothers, the 10 of them, not Benjamin, but the other ones, go to Shechem. We see this in verse 12. And this is a major red flag for us, right? Anyone remember what happened at Shechem? Not good stuff, right? The sister Dinah was violated by the prince. Simeon and Levi deceitfully make a contract asking all the men of the city to get circumcised. After they're recovering, Simeon and Levi go in and kill all the men, mass murder, and kidnap the women and children. I mean, welcome to Shechem. It's crazy. So when we hear Shechem, the warning bells should be going off in our heads. From home, Shechem's about 50 miles away from Joseph, and Dothan is another 15 miles. This would have been a 4 to 5 day trip. And Jacob sends Joseph as the manager to go check on the brothers. Now, Joseph has a hard time finding the brothers. Remember, there's no iPhones, no Find Friends back then, no cars even. So he's got a lot of ground to cover. And in verse 15, it says Joseph's just wandering through a field. It's kind of funny. It's like Joseph's just wandering. Does this show his incompetence or his diligence? We're not sure. But we don't know. But a random man finds Joseph in the field. Just this random dude. And he says, "What are you looking for?" Joseph replies, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they're grazing their flocks?" And this random man replies, "They moved on from here. I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" Who is this guy? Well, we'll come back to that later. So Joseph heads in his brother's direction, and they see him from a long way off, probably because of his brightly colored coat. And they say this in verse 18. They decide they want to kill him. They say, "Here comes the dreamer." Literally in Hebrew, "Here comes the Lord of the dreams. Let's kill him." Reuben, the oldest brother, the voice of reason, says, "No, let's just throw him into a pit instead." So they decide to do that. They rip the coat off him, probably punch him a few times, throw him into a pit that was probably dried up but would normally hold water. And they sit down and eat lunch callously. And then some slave traders come by, and Judah pipes up and says, "Let's sell him instead of kill him. That way we kind of assuage our conscience. We don't have to actually kill him, but then we get him off our hands." And we don't know where Reuben is. Maybe he's in the bathroom or something. But all of a sudden he's not there anymore. Odd. And so the slave traders, the Ishmaelites and the Midianites are there. They buy Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. The brothers stage a slaughter. They take Joseph's coat, dip it in some blood, some ram's blood, and take it back to their father. Obviously, there's no CSI Shechem back then, to determine that this is animal blood, and Jacob is deceived by his sons. Kind of reminds us when Jacob deceived his own father, Isaac, for the birthright. Only this situation gets worse. Joseph sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and a captain of the guard. And then the lights go dim. That's the end of Genesis 37. So I want us to circle back and talk about who this man is. Who's this man in the field? Kind of feels like an accident. In fact, there's a number of accidents that seem to happen that make probably Joseph think he has the absolute worst luck in the world. For example, Jacob decided to send Joseph to go find his brothers, but the brothers just happened to move away from Shechem to a remote place, Dothan, where whatever happened, no one would know. Joseph just happens to come to the place and run into this random man who happened to overhear where they were going. He gets there, and Joseph happens to find his brothers where Reuben happens to save him, but isn't able to save him when he gets sold into slavery. There's just all sorts of random instances. God seems absent. Seems like a lot of bad luck. But in reality, God is directing the whole thing. We don't know who the man is, but he demonstrates that God is directing Joseph down this dark path. God is at work behind the scenes, making sure Joseph reunites with his brothers, despite what they'll do to him. When we've been thrown into a pit, when we've hit rock bottom, when we've been enslaved in some sort of situation, there is this sense in which God has brought us here. He didn't make people sin. He doesn't make you and I sin. We choose that. But wherever you are this morning, whether you're successfully wearing the coat, whether you're in the pit, whether you're wandering and searching, whether you're enslaved by the Midianites, God has good intentions for you in whatever season you're in. This is both frustrating and liberating. First, frustrating because it brings up thousands of questions. Why didn't God prevent this? Why did God allow me to meet that man who led me to my bloodthirsty brothers who decided to sell me? Why did God let that person sin against me? Why did God allow that gunman to unload on the crowd? Why does God allow sickness to steal and cancer to kill? Why did God allow my spouse to meet that other person? Why does God allow me to have desires for someone of the same sex? Why does God allow bad things to happen to us? Sometimes people get so frustrated by these questions and the problem of evil that they are even led to atheism. One of the arguments goes like this: if there's a God and he's all powerful and all good, then there should be no evil. But evil does exist, so there's no God. That's kind of how the argument goes. One atheistic way to frame it. But what this argument misses, I think, is God's good intention through evil. What he can do in spite of it. You see, God's going to use Joseph's brothers' evil actions. He's going to do something amazing in the world. He's going to bring good out of an awful situation. The 12 brothers and Jacob will get to experience extreme character change. God knows they need it. The most powerful man in the world, Pharaoh, will change. All of Egypt and the entire known world will benefit from Joseph's wisdom during a famine. I think also we need a perspective shift on most of these situations because they could almost always be worse. I notice God's mercy on Joseph, his protection of him. He doesn't allow the brothers to kill him. He doesn't allow Joseph to sustain any serious injury from the beating or the fall into the pit. God directs Joseph to be sold to the prestigious Potiphar instead of to the mines or the pyramid workers. God's often restraining evil. How many of you have ever noticed, maybe you see a car accident 30 seconds in front of you, and you remember back to the delay at the McDonald's coffee line and wonder if that could have been you in that car accident? Or, I used to ride my motorcycle more, and coming home late from youth group, there were a few times where I just missed a deer that could have killed me on a motorcycle. And maybe that inconvenient situation at youth group caused me to miss the deer. I remember not jumping off a 60-foot bridge into the Illinois River because I had a hurt knee. And that was before my decision-making area of my brain had fully developed. They say 25 is when that happens. I was probably 18 or 19. But I wonder if there'll be a DVD or a Blu-ray series in heaven of the potential evil that God avoided, that God restrained in our lives and in our world and in our country. I wonder if the better question is not, God, why did you not stop this, but God, what are you up to here? What did you possibly prevent? Yeah, knowing God is in control can be frustrating, but the other alternative is terrifying, that God's not in control. A powerful God who's limited by human decisions. See, could anything be more terrifying than the thought that God is not in control, that God's like a queen on the chessboard, but limited by the moves and the rules of the game? No. God's control is both comforting and liberating. Isaiah 46:10, I make known from the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say my purposes will stand, and I will do all that I please. Psalm 33:11, but the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through all generations. Proverbs 19:21, many are the plans of a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. And God's purpose is not just for his own pleasure, but it's for our good as well. It reminds me of the time, it's not like the time, my dad bought a mountain bike for my mom for Christmas. But the only person who ever rode the mountain bike after Christmas was my dad. It's a gift that was just for him. See, God doesn't set things up just for him, but he sets it up for our own good as well. God's purposes function for your good and my good. We'll continually come back to Genesis 50:20, the summary of maybe the whole book. You intended to harm me, Joseph says to his brothers, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Through this series, we're going to watch Joseph and his family learn to trust the goodness of God in the midst of all the mess. I've mentioned this quote before from J.I. Packer, wisdom without power would be pathetic. Power without wisdom would be merely frightening. But in God, boundless wisdom and endless power are united, and that makes him worthy of our utmost trust. A couple hymns came to mind as I was thinking through this message, and one of them was God Moves in Mysterious Ways by William Cowper. I'm going to kind of read through this hymn. God moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Deep and unfathomable minds of never-failing skill, he treasures up his bright designs and works his sovereign will. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take, the clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. This last line's my favorite. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence, he hides a smiling face. I love that last image. Behind a frowning providence, when things don't look good, when the clouds are massive, sometimes life looks like it's frowning at us. But beyond all that is a caring, loving God. As Larry mentioned earlier, we've just experienced a lot of tragedy as a community and as a country in the last couple weeks and months. Heavy stuff. And let me tell you what this has looked like in my life personally over the last couple weeks. I received some pretty devastating news yesterday that of some friends of mine. When I went to school in Redding, I got real close with a church community in Mount Shasta City. And one of my friends, a man that I'd done ministry with, a man that I'd led worship with, tragically and unexplainably took his wife's life and took his own life. And I found out about this yesterday. They leave behind 2 small children and a devastated family, a devastated church community. And so as I'm trying to process this and work through this and pray for my friends that are grieving, I just wonder why this happened. And there really aren't any good answers right now. And for me, it's difficult to believe even now what I've been preaching for the last couple minutes. It's difficult to believe that God could have some sort of plan in this, that he could work the situation out for good. But I do believe that. Imperfectly, but I do. Because of God's hidden pattern of grace. You see, Joseph's story will become a pattern, a template, a blueprint for how God's going to work ultimate restoration. The ultimate pattern of grace would be revealed when another like Joseph would come. He too would be loved by his father, but rejected by everyone else. Betrayed for silver, thrown into a pit. But this time, no one rescued Jesus from death. He went through it. He experienced an undeserved death. And so when suffering hits us, remember that suffering hit God too. In the person of Jesus on the cross. Jesus takes human brokenness, sin, and suffering so seriously that he became human to experience it himself and to take it on himself. See, you might not get the answers you're looking for, but you can have something better. You can have God. A God who's close to the brokenhearted. A God who saves the crushed in spirit. And we know this because God himself was brokenhearted. God himself was crushed in body and spirit. You see, the story of Joseph is a template of the story of Jesus. As we close the service today, I want to invite the ushers to come and to take the offering. An opportunity to give back in the light of all that God's given to us. And if you're a guest here today, please feel no obligation to give. As the ushers are passing the baskets, I want us to look at and then sing a final hymn, a refrain to a hymn together. It's the hymn, "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus," and the refrain here. And this line, "How I've proved him o'er and o'er," it's kind of an old way of saying it, kind of a funny way of saying it, but it's just this idea, how many times I've seen Jesus come through. How many times I've seen Jesus work in my life. And then that last line, "Oh, for grace to trust him more." It's just this idea that even our trust of God is a gift. It's an act of grace. Let's sing this twice together.